Hello, class. This is Professor Reynolds again, and I'm going to be covering Chapter 2. As I've discussed before, or as we really looked at Chapter 1, um, what we're going to be covering today involves allocating overhead and the best way to do that. So, as a refresher, a manufacturing facility has this big facility, and it has all this different equipment, and it has all these different people, and they have all these different functions. And some of these are directly related to making the product. So if you're making cars, the people that are assembling these cars are the direct labor. And the parts that go into these cars would be the direct materials. And then you have, of course, everything else, which is called overhead. And that would be the managers, and that would be depreciation, that would be insurance, maybe an HR person devoted strictly to manufacturing, et cetera. And so we want to be able to attach these costs to the product that gives us the most accurate depiction of what our costs really are. So we want to make sure that we're allocating costs on a particular basis that is that provides really good, useful information. So this chapter, we're going to look at a couple different ways of doing that. And this will be what your project is. So what you'll have is your project will be that you will determine what the overhead allocation is under different methods. First one is going to be the company or the facility wide. So there's just one way you're allocating it. And then we'll go down to where it's activity based costing. So you'll look at different factors and different features. And so you'll have more than just one overhead rate. So the job order costing system is one where you are allocating to a specific job. So in other words, you're not building the same product over and over again. You're building different products. And so you want to know what that particular product that you're building is going to cost you. So in this, many different products are produced each period. They're product manufactured to order. So these are custom type. And the unique nature of each order requires tracing or allocating cost to each job and maintaining cost records for each job. And so you could in paint, you could say, well, I'm going to make this type of paint, and then I'm going to make this type of paint. But of course, all of that paint would be similar. You could have custom furniture that you were building, something along those lines. Boeing, aircraft manufacturing, they make these big planes. It takes them a long time. So they would have job order for that particular plane. Large scale construction. Vista Print, business card designer, printer, shipper. So when you order business cards from Vista Print, they will do it by the job, and they will uh, allocate overhead for those particular jobs. So you have these different jobs, and you have direct costs, again, direct costs or direct labor, and direct materials. And so direct materials would come from this warehouse or the storage place in the manufacturing facility. And you would, once you use these parts, you would then transfer these costs from raw materials to work in process. So every time you do this, you probably have some type of recording device. So you'll have a little barcode, and you'll click on the barcode, and you'll say, this is for job number one. So the computer will automatically transfer from raw materials to working process for job one, job two, job three, etc. Same thing with direct labor. For each part, each step in the assembly, they will say, okay, I spent 2 hours on this job. So now I'm going to expense or move 2 hours of direct labor and benefit costs to these different jobs. So manufacturing overhead, including indirect materials and indirect labor, are allocated to all jobs rather than directly traced to each job. So basically, you have all this manufacturing overhead that you have to allocate, and you're going to have one rate dependent on maybe either labor hours or machine hours or the number of products that you're making, and you're going to use that to allocate these overhead costs. So you would have a job ticket, and you could have something just as simple as someone filling out this form. Most likely these days you're going to have a computer that automatically does that. If you fill out these forms, then you still have to take this, take it to the accounting department or some department, and do the actual transfers on your books wherever you're keeping your records. So it's a lot easier if you have a system that ties all of this together. And so in this case, we've got total materials of 660 that went to this job, and we've got direct labor of $90. So that's 5 hours of labor that went to this particular job. Now that $1,660 of labor consists of two M46 housings at 124 bucks a piece for $248. You have four G7 connectors, unit cost 103, so that's 412. And so your total material costs are going to be 660, but and this is called a bill of material. I was trying to think of that on chapter one, but that's a bill of material. The bill of material is the list of all the parts that go into this. And so you have the direct material costs that are accumulated. And then you have labor costs. So we started out, we had 90, and now we moved into this is job number 2850. All right. So we've got $90 for 20, or maybe that's a B, 2B47, 2B50. And then we have maintenance. And this is Mary Holden, and this is what she did today. And so we're going to allocate her time to this job, that job, and to overhead. Maintenance would most likely be considered overhead. All right, so we're still only part of her labor costs are going to go to this job. Part of her labor costs are going to go to the other job. Part of her labor costs are going to go to overhead. So we're going to compute a predetermined overhead rate, and we have to make certain assumptions. Our assumptions are we have to assume how much overhead we're going to have. We have to assume how many labor hours we're going to use. So in this case, an allocation base such as direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, or machine hours is used to assign manufacturing overhead to individual jobs. And it's really just a very simple calculation. Now, creating and determining all these parts is not necessarily something easy, but this is a fairly easy calculation because all we're going to do is determine, well, what are our total estimated manufacturing costs going to be, and what are our estimated units? Because it's difficult to apply this as you go along because you don't know how many total labor hours and total manufacturing costs you're actually going to have. So you're going to assume you're going to allocate it, and then whatever's left over, you will have to do something with it. So our cost driver in this case is going to be one of these factors. All right, so predetermined overhead rates that rely upon estimated data are often useful because, again, you don't know what the actual costs are going to be. And they do fluctuate seasonally. So you want to, again, try to get as accurate information. You may know that in July, production goes down, so you're not going to have quite as much production. So this formula looks a little complicated, but basically we're looking at overhead in a couple different ways. So there's a total of manufacturing overhead that's sort of fixed costs. We've got this facility, we have to pay for it. We can't really get rid of it, so that's sort of a fixed cost. And then there may be some variable manufacturing costs, and that would be dependent upon the number of units. So the estimated total manufacturing overhead is equal to the fixed manufacturing overhead plus the estimated overhead cost per unit times the base. All right, so apply overhead cost to jobs using a predetermined overhead rate. So here we have where our overhead is $640,000. That's our fixed cost. And then we're going to add $4 per direct labor hour. All right, so we've estimated that our variable overhead costs are going to be $4 per hour. And that could be things like ketchup or a hamburger or solder if you're for computers, boards, etc. So we're going to use 40,000 direct labor hours. So 40,000 times 4 is 160. 160,000 plus 840 is $800,000. So again, the math is fairly simple. And now we've got $800,000 overhead that we have to allocate, and we're going to do it based on 40,000 hours of direct labor. So for every hour of direct labor, we're going to attach another $20 of overhead. And so that gets factored into the product costs. And you can see here, this is job order 2B47. We have the direct materials that total 1404. We have the direct labor hours of 27 hours, and that totals 446. And then we're going to apply that 27 hours of overhead at $20 per direct labor hour. And so that's $540. So this is going to cost us 404 in direct materials, 445 or 446 in direct labor, and 540 in manufacturing overhead. So we made two of these. The total is 2390. So each one of these is going to cost us $1,195 each. And so that's how we determine our cost. So compute the total cost and the unit production product cost of a job using a plant-wide predetermined overhead rate. And that's really what we were using, okay? We have one rate, and it doesn't matter what product it is. Every product is going to get $20 attached based on the direct labor hours. So again, here it's 540. And then the product cost, unit product cost is simply 1195, which is the total of these three amounts divided by the number, which is 2. So job WR53 required $200 of direct labor materials and 10 direct labor hours at $15 per hour. So direct materials is $200. Direct labor hours is 10 hours times 15, $150. Estimated total overhead for the year was $760,000. Estimated direct labor hours were 20,000. What would be the recorded cost? All right, so this is going to consist of the direct materials of $200, the direct labor of $150, so that's $350. And then we're going to attach 10 hours of overhead. And so 760 divided by 20,000 is, I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. $3.80. All right, or 38. Let's try that again. I don't think that's correct. 760. Try to do it the short way. Well, like that's $38. All right. So our components of this product are $200 of direct material, $150 of direct labor, and then the overhead rate is $38. We've got 10 hours of direct labor, so that's 10 times 38 is 380 plus 200 plus 150, so the answer should be D. And you can see the computation here. 760 divided by 20,000. And that's how we determine how much this product is going to cost us. Um, job order cost is systems can accurately trace direct material and direct labor, but it's not very detailed as far as getting down to the overhead. It's overly simplistic. If more than one overhead cost driver can be identified, job cost accuracy is improved by using multiple predetermined overhead rates. All right, so we're going to look at that. And we have, before we used one rate, now we're going to break it down into the milling and the assembly, and we're going to determine what our overhead rate is for each of these. And it also says the company uses cost plus pricing and a markup percentage of 75% of the total manufacturing costs. So we have milling, machine hours 6,000, assembly 3,000, direct labor hours 8,000, 80,000, 390,000 for overhead, $500,000 for assembly. And so our milling department overhead is going to be this 390 plus $2 times whatever is, well, let's look at this. All right, so during the current month, the company stated and completed Job 407 and wants to use its predetermined department overhead costs and rate for the milling and assembly departments. So, milling department overhead is determined by machine hours, and so it's $2 per machine hour plus 390, and so the total overhead for the milling department is going to be 510. For the assembly department, it's going to be by direct labor hours, and it's 375 per direct labor hours. So we've got an overhead amount for the assembly department of 800,000. All right, and so milling department again is going to be $8.50 per machine hour that we're going to attach. And then for the assembly department, it's going to be more direct labor hours. So for every direct labor hour, we're going to attach $10. So here you can see that we've got 90 machine hours times the 850. So that's $765 of overhead that we're going to attach. And the assembly department is going to be 20 direct labor hours times the $10 rate, 200. So we're going to add the direct materials of 800 plus 370. We're going to add the direct labor of 70 plus 280. And then we're going to add this overhead amount of 765 plus 200. And so for job 407, our costs are going to be 1170 in direct materials, 350 in direct labor, and 965 in overhead. But again, in the milling department, we're attaching the overhead by machine hours because that's more relevant. And in the assembly department, we're going to attach it for direct labor hours because that's more relevant. So if we're going to mark the job up 75%, and we're going to mark it up 75% of our cost, then what we're going to sell this job for is $4,348.75. So this 1863.75 really represents our profit. And so this would represent a different selling price because if we used one plant-wide rate, this figure might be off, and so that's going to make our sales price incorrect. So multiple predetermined overhead rates and activity-based approach. When a company creates overhead rates based on activities that it performs, it's employing an approach called activity-based costing. It's an alternative approach, and it depends on what activities are actually taking place. So here we're going to look at these subsidiary ledgers. So all of the company's job sheets collectively form a subsidiary ledger. And this is really going to be work in process at this point. So we're going to be moving the direct materials. So we had $100 in raw materials. We're now moving that amount into work in process. And the direct labor hours will charge him directly to this job. And manufacturing overhead, of course, will allocate that. So the total charge for the job in A in May is 276. So all of these jobs that are in process, we're going to add them up, and that's going to give us our balance for work in process. And for direct materials, of course, every time we move direct materials from the warehouse to a job, we're going to decrease the inventory in direct materials and increase work in process. Now, once this job is fully complete, then we'll move that from work in process. So the work in process inventory will decline and the finished goods inventory will increase. And of course, then when we sell that product, finished goods inventory will decrease and we'll record a sell. And so this a figure will become our cost of goods sold because that's how much it cost us to make this product. The amount of overhead applied to all jobs during a period will differ from the actual amount. All right. So we have this bucket, and let's say the bucket was $800,000, and at the end of the month, we our direct labor hours were actually more than what we thought they would be. And so if we attach $20, but the direct labor hours are more, that means we're going to over apply. And so we have to make a correction. Now, the alternative here is that instead of the 60,000 hours, we only use 50,000 hours. So we essentially have 10,000 hours we didn't apply. So then that was under applied. So again, you're doing this based on estimates, but you're going to record the actual amounts. And so there may be a difference at the end of each month, and it's either under applied or over applied. You'd like to get that as close as possible. So the adjustment for underapplied just goes strictly to cost of goods sold without necessarily going to a specific product. And so that's why you want to be as accurate as possible because that distorts your actual cost that you want to know. Same thing with over applied, that would decrease your cost of goods sold because now you've got this balance that you've over applied and you've got to decrease that. So you're decreasing cost of goods sold. So you can do this with service as well. You can do it with law firms, you can do it with accounting firms, you can do it with medical treatments, and you just come up with your overhead rate. If you're a plumber, you think, well, I'm going to expect to do so many jobs this month, and my overhead is X, so I'm going to apply that. Same thing with medical treatments, with hospitals, with surgery, etc. All right, now let's see if I can get to this other spreadsheet. Okay, I can't, so I will do this in another lecture, but the importance here is that, again, you have manufacturing overhead. It has to be attached to products. The intent here really is to get the best information on what our cost to manufacture a product is, whether it's a car, whether it's a hamburger, whether it's a rake or a lawnmower. We want accurate information. We really want to know what does it actually cost us. And so we're attaching the overhead in some way. And you can either do it with one plant-wide rate, which isn't as accurate, or you could try to break it down into activities. You could have the testing department. You could have the shipping department, okay? Although shipping really is not part of the product cost, but the packaging department would be. So you could say, well, how much does this product spend in the packaging department? It may take longer to package one product versus the other. It may take more materials. So the more you can refine this, the better idea you will have as to how much your costs are. And that, of course, we saw that determines your sales price and that determines your cost. And if you're wrong, then you could really be off, and it could hurt your profitability. All right, that's pretty much chapter 2. Hopefully that you got a fairly good grasp of this concept. And now I have to figure out how to stop this video. So here it is. Okay.